So let me begin with a funny story. There were these three little boys who were bragging about their fathers, and the first boy said, "My dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, he calls it a poem, and they pay him $50. The second little boy said, "That's nothing. My dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, he calls it a song, and they pay him $100. And the third little boy said, "I've got you both beat. My dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, he calls it a sermon, and 8 people have to collect the money." So here are my scribblings today. I hope you're generous when it comes time to put money in the plate. So last Tuesday, remember last Tuesday, it's Sunday now, I intended to send in my form 4868, my request for extension on my taxes with the IRS. Now, you need to know that I do this every year because as a clergy person, inevitably Lent and Easter fall at the height of tax season. And so about 12 or 15 years ago, I decided to let myself off the hook, and I always just file an extension. And some years I actually get the taxes done in May, and some years not until October, but that's the way I do it. But just this time on Tuesday, it was a very full day. I knew that I needed to I usually print out the form, and I put in all the little things. I Xerox how I sent it. I send it off and take it to the mailbox, and all is done. Well, this year, I actually researched online about how they're doing it nowadays. So I came to understand that current best practice had changed, and it seems that there are new rules. If one submits a paper request, as I was accustomed to doing, then a confirmation of that request is not sent to you. And so they're trying to drive people to the internet. So if, however, you put your request online and submit it, then a confirmation is sent almost immediately. So I thought, okay, good. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Today's a huge day. I don't have a lot going on tomorrow. I'll send this thing off tomorrow. Sounds like it's going to be easy. So I got into work the next day, a little after 9, and Linda, who handles our IT, had already started running a security software on my computer. And it was going to take at least 3 hours. So I thought, okay, I can do that. I'll do this other work. That'll be great. So about a little afternoon, after it was finished, then she said it was done. I had to reboot my computer, and so I tried to use it. And it seemed a little slow, and then all of a sudden it crashed completely. It was frozen. My screen was frozen. Nothing clicked. Nothing did anything. So all of a sudden there's this pop-up that comes up with all this advice about how to help me and how to fix my computer. And so not wanting to go back to Linda yet, I thought, oh, I can do this. So I followed the prompts, and I even called the phone numbers that were provided. And so when I called this phone number, I got this woman on the line who, and this is not prejudicial, it's just she was hard to understand because she was clearly from South Asia, but her name was Jane. And so I began to question Jane about herself and about her company and the legitimacy of the help that she was offering me. And really, I couldn't make heads or tails of the best way to solve my problem. So finally I went and got Linda, and Linda talked to Jane for at least a couple of hours. So for the next 3 hours, Linda went back and forth with Jane and the Geek Squad, and finally we got my computer up and running, and it was functional. And indeed, Jane was running a scam. So I thought, okay, I dodged that bullet. Now finally I could get to my computer and file my extension. So I did that really well. I even remembered that password and my password from last year and all of that. Put everything in, and a reply came back almost immediately that said my extension had been received. So I went on to other work, right? was just having a good old time. I finally got to some work that day. So about 5:30 on the computer, I get another message that says, it's a notice that says my extension has been rejected because either my husband or I have already filed our taxes and gotten a refund, which was not true. So again, I was given an option. By then, Linda was gone. I was given an option of calling the IRS or working online. So I called twice, right? I called twice. And I followed the prompts, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And finally, both times, I was very unceremoniously dumped off the line and instructed to go to the website because the call volume was too high. So I spent 2 hours on the website following the prompts and writing messages to what we call support and to someone who's somewhere out there in the ether whom I'm suspecting is not a person at all, but is some algorithmed computer that's answering me. And by 8:30 at night, I was hungry. Our household was out of everything from milk to toilet paper, so I left my computer. I went to the grocery store. I bought a dinner that I could microwave at home. I went home, microwaved it, ate it, and I went to bed. These many days later, I am still corresponding with the IRS's version of Siri about my taxes and or potential identity theft and fraud. This is the new normal. Now, the term new normal is a cliche which came up in our language in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008 and the subsequent global recession and the new reality about finances. So the term new normal has then spread to other areas, and it often refers to something which was previously abnormal that has become commonplace. And although the term new normal may be new, the experience is not. I mean, many of you have experienced the new normal related to the rapidly changing landscape of computer technology as it interfaces with business and commerce and government, as my story describes. And what about social media? I mean, I remember the time 5 years ago I was trying to communicate with Martha Isaacs and some of your kids and our youth group kids, and they had always been responding to my email, and I thought, why aren't they responding? Guess what? They moved on from email to text messaging, and I was behind the times. We can all identify with a new normal that came with air travel after 9/11, right? What had been abnormal before all of a sudden was the new normal. And I also imagine, like in the 16th century, following the invention of the printing press and the wide distribution of the Holy Bible in the language of the people, that the new normal was quite a surprise to the religious leaders of that day who were used to controlling the information and the discussion around religion and faith and belief. Their new normal was an educated laity and people in the pew who actually knew what the Bible said, and it caused a revolution. We call that the Reformation. So when Jesus, in Luke's gospel today, decided to show up unannounced in a room where the disciples were gathered in fear and anxiety, he was inviting them to a new normal. In the midst of their terror and confusion, he stood among them and he offered them peace. Now, I should have been praying more on Wednesday myself. I should have been looking for that peace. They were suspicious, though, weren't they? They had just experienced what we might even call today PTSD, trauma at the loss of their friend, at the loss of their movement, and trauma because their lives had been committed to this movement and they didn't know what they were going to do next. And the gospel says they thought they were seeing a ghost, it was so unbelievable that his presence was with them. And so Jesus reassured them with words and actions. He ate with them. He asked for some food, and then he ate fish. And 50 years later, when they wrote this gospel, they still remember that he ate broiled fish because it was so amazing. You know, And then he did what he'd always done with them. He asked them about their doubts, and he let them touch his body and his wounds. And he spent time explaining to them the experience they were having and how that was related to God and to their faith. So the disciples were no better at grasping and adjusting to their new normal than I have been or than we are. They fumbled around trying to understand what Jesus meant. They stammered when they spoke about him and his resurrection and his appearances, and they didn't feel confident when they were called before governors and authorities because of this new thing they were doing. But it was their new reality, their new normal. He had risen. And somewhere deep within themselves, they knew that everything else had changed. He had come among them. He was not a ghost. He had a body. It was him. And although they were shocked and scared, his rising to life again, he reminded them, was not altogether new. He'd been talking to them about that before he was crucified. So, if you're the disciples, you're thinking, well, if this is true, and it seems to be, that God's love and power can radically change reality, then what else is true that I'm not paying attention to? I mean, what about those other things that Jesus had told them and taught them during those 3 years that they had been together? Could they also be true? Other things like the enormous benefit in loving one's neighbor as oneself, the great joy in giving up one's life for another, or the wise counsel about forgiving and forgiving and forgiving. Were those true also? This was their new normal. Now, I didn't do so well on Wednesday adjusting to my new normal. I'm going to need a better strategy next year as April 15th rolls around. And for one, I'm going to make sure that the staff is not trying to install the new version of Kaspersky on my computer. But I might even have to consider doing my taxes in January and avoiding this hassle altogether. But I will adjust. The government doesn't want paper anymore, and the new reality has a force to it. It's not going to change, so I'm going to have to change. Those youth group members, they've never gone back to email. And airports still require a lot of extra time and effort with their security. And we haven't stopped reading the Bible and challenging our religious leaders over the last 500 years. The same is true for this Easter story. Jesus rising from the dead and appearing to his disciples in bodily form was a game changer, a new normal. Love prevailed 2,000 years ago and prevails today. The new normal for the disciples and for all of us who sit here this morning is resurrection. Resurrection, a new normal, that which was abnormal becoming commonplace. Pain, destruction, and death are not final words. They are only the sad actions of misguided impulses from terrified people. But we can sometimes be those misguided or terrified people. We can be deluded into thinking that destruction, pain, or death instead are the new normal. Let's just get used to wars in the Middle East. It's the thing we have to do. We can forget that Jesus appeared to us and calmed our fears and offered us peace. The path of life and the way of love can get strewn with the debris of self-justification, and we can be in danger of letting the way of death and destruction become the new normal, rather than the way of resurrection. Pope Francis, speaking about our destructive tendencies, said, even today, 2,000 years later, we raise our hand against our brother. We have perfected our weapons. Our conscience has fallen asleep, and we have sharpened our ideas to justify ourselves. As if it were normal, we continue to sow destruction, pain, death. Violence and war lead only to death. The reality we claim as Christians for our lives sets our direction and our life. The same was true for those disciples in that room. They could have claimed the chaos of destruction and death, or they could have claimed what they learned in their encounter with Jesus. They could claim life and resurrection. If we believe in the patterns of destruction and violence that they can bring peace, we will embrace those methods and justify our actions, even when peace never comes. But if we believe that the patterns of love and forgiveness that Jesus has taught us can bring peace, then we are given the capacity to embrace the way of nonviolence and forgiveness and love. So now those first words that Jesus spoke to them when he walked in the room make sense. Peace, peace be with you. And he ended his conversation with them saying, you are witnesses. So my prayer for us is that we may live by what we have also known. The love of God in Jesus Christ. We are witnesses to the power of love over pain, destruction, and death. And we are witnesses that are called to claim that reality as the new normal. So let's live the resurrection with the same force and acceptance and inevitability as we embrace with the new technology all around us, knowing that it's the only way. Amen.